And when you got to the Dodgers, I think it was Dick Tracewski, he actually called you Gomer as a nickname for Gomer Pyle from the Andrew Griffith Show. How and when did that come about, the nickname Gomer?
Well, at that time, and I'm sure it probably still happens, but a lot of the Hollywood stars were in our clubhouse regularly. And if it was, Milton Berle, if it was Danny Kaye, if it was Jim Neighbors, but they all came in at one time or another, and Jim Neighbors was in our clubhouse, and of course, there had been some talk about the resemblance facially of myself and Jim Neighbors, and Tracewski's the one who gave me that name, and of course, when he came in and everything, everyone had us side by side, and they were kind of making gestures at how much we looked alike, and so that name kind of caught on, and of course his show, the Gomer Pyle Show, was running number one at that time, and of course it kind of caught on and stayed with me. I can't say that it did that much for me, but I put up with it, and everyone has a nickname.
From what I noticed, those Dodger teams in the mid-'60s, they really had a thing for coming back in September. And 65, you guys are back 4.5 games of the Giants, and you guys actually won 13 in a row, and you won 15 of your final 16, and you guys finished first place in the National League to win the pennant in 65. What jump-started all of that? What kind of, spark plug, or what do you think it was that you guys were able to win 13 in a row like that and pull that off? What kind of a turning point? What was the main factor in that big winning streak of September of that year in 65?
Well, I remember one thing vividly. Ron Fairley was my roommate back then, at that time, and we were in our room in Milwaukee, and Don Drysdale called us on the phone and asked us to come down and meet him in the bar downstairs. And so Fairley and I went down there, and he was sitting at the bar by himself, and anytime Drysdale was sitting there alone with his two fingers on his lips, he is in deep thought. And that's the way we saw him when we walked up. And what he was thinking about was, he started the conversation. He said, he said, we could win this thing. And we both looked at each other, and at that time, like you say, we were 4 out, I think. And there was 11 or 7 left to play? Something like that. Anyway, it got my attention, and we were kind of the kind of club that year that we did not put together the streaks that you're talking about, but we'd win 5, maybe lose 1, win 6, lose 1, but we'd toss a loss in there, and we were at a position where we could not do that. And I mentioned that. I said, well, yeah, we could, but I said, we're really not a streaky team. I said, we win 4 and lose 1, win 5, lose 1. We can't afford to lose. And he said, he said, we could do it. We could do it. And so he said, we got to start talking about this. And of course we did. And we went to dinner a lot and talked about it. At that time, it was not uncommon to see the entire pitching staff at dinner together. We had a lot of togetherness, and we had a lot of fun together. And of course, the rest of the story. We were able to do what he said we could do, and went on and won
you guys weren't that much of a high-scoring offense, and the defense behind you guys would sometimes be shaky. So how was the rest of the team able to pick up on what Ron Fairley said and be able to relay that to the rest of the guys so you guys put together the winning streak that you did?
Well, I think the fact that the pitching staff was aware of what we were trying to do, and I think the team caught up on that. It's not that we changed our pitching that much, but I think we became a little bit more stingier in giving up runs. And of course, there was a drive, and everybody immediately picked up on, here's how many games we've got left, and here's what we've got to do, and we just could not afford to win. And there was tremendous scoreboard watching back then. They would flash on the Dodger Stadium scoreboard the scores of the teams back east, and of course a lot of them would be over before our game would be, and so that drove us a lot when the team that we were chasing would lose and stuff like that. It'd give you a little bit of extra incentive, and it was really fun to be in that time frame.
If I recall correctly, you were actually the winning pitcher in that first game of the win streak, September 16th against the Cubs at Wrigley Field. Weather was gray, it was gloomy, so it wasn't exactly sunshine, and you actually did very well. You held them to 5 hits, no runs, you got the run support and the win, and there wasn't so sure if the game was going to be called or not. So how much of a challenge was it for you that day at Wrigley Field during that dark day that started the whole winning streak?
Well, I tell you, all the things that you had to do when you went into Chicago and you were going to pitch, the first thing I would check was the wind, which way it's blowing, and that would tell me how I have to pitch. And of course, at that time, my game was complete preparation, and that really helped me a lot. I enjoyed pitching in Wrigley. You could not make mistakes there because it was a small ballpark, and yet you could take advantage of the wind if it's blowing to right. You didn't worry about left-handed hitters hitting the ball out of right field. Not many of them, and if you pitched them right, and vice versa with the right-handers if it's blowing in from left. So the infield was always a good infield for ground balls. The grass was thick, and it would slow the hard-hit ball down where the infielders could make plays on it. So it was a real challenge there because they had good hitters. Billy Williams, Ron Santo, Jim Hickman, all those guys could hit the long ball, and of course the Cubs were notorious for coming back in the late innings at that time. And I remember I had some moderate success with Billy Williams early on in my career, and I remember one day in Los Angeles, we were taking batting practice, and when our hitting was over, the Cubs were ready to jump into batting cages, and I was walking in from right field, and Billy Williams approached me, and he said, "You know something?" He said, "I haven't figured you out yet." And I thought that was one of the most interesting comments that anyone had ever made to me. What it told me was that from this point on, I'm going to have my work cut out in getting him out, and I certainly did. He was a hard guy to get out. In fact, you weren't going to get him out with consistency.
Well, Sweet Swingin' Billy's in the Hall of Fame for a reason, but you guys did win that game, and September 19th, just 3 days later, you're pitching on 2 days of rest against the Cardinals, and you guys won 5-0, and you went 8 innings. What was your reaction when you found out you would go on 2 days rest, and then Walter Alston, Johnny Roseboro, how'd they walk you through that? What was it like for you to pitch on 2 days rest at that time in that game against St. Louis.
Well, I was happy about it because we relished that regularity. The quicker you can get out there, we liked it much better. In fact, I think for 10 years or approximately that, I pitched on the four-man rotation. And, of course, I was probably the one who could probably do that easier than the other two. I'm speaking of Drysdale and Koufax because they were more power pitchers and they needed that extra rest. And, of course, my velocity with another day's rest is probably not going to help me any because I've got what I've got, and it's got to be put in the right place, and it's got to have the right movement. In fact, one of the things that I had trouble with in my career is when we went from a four-man rotation to a five-man rotation, and that extra rest gave me a little bit more power, and I did not know how to use that power. I had it in my mind that it kind of straightened my fastball out. It made me throw harder, but I had less movement. And I didn't like that at all. And, of course, part of it was in my head, and part of it was real. But I had to learn how to figure it out and harness that extra strength. And, of course, having done the four-man rotation, anytime you just change the way that you prepared for your start on your side pin that you're going to throw between starts. I probably didn't throw that when I had to pitch with 2 days rest. So, but it didn't hurt me at all. I loved it.
When talking about pitches, you talked earlier about your curveball, your fastball, your changeup. And one thing they really used in the pennant race of 65 was your sinker ball. Who taught you that, and when do you think you first started using that pitch?
Well, when I first came up and signed a pro contract, I probably threw harder than I ended up throwing in my entire career. I probably threw 90 or 92, maybe, and my fastball was too straight. And I found out real quickly that at that velocity and a straight fastball, even if I made some good pitches, most probably they're going to get hit. And I saw real quickly that I had to work on movement and get the fastball moving and put it in better locations. And so I gave up some velocity to do that. And I probably settled in at somewhere between 88 and 90 regularly, and with good movement and real good control. So it worked for me, and it was a sign of the time at that time, and it's something that you had to do if you wanted to stay in the major leagues.
When you talk about preparation and that extra day of rest with the five-man rotation gave you extra time to prepare, how about during that pennant drive against the Giants? Because they themselves, they won 14 straight in September, and they swept you guys, and they beat you in that second game 3-1 with Jim Ray Hart hitting that two-run homer, also scoring Willie Mays. And you previously against the Giants, you went 2-0 that season, but you also had 2-0 decisions up until that point. You had a complete game shutout June 17th. And 1965 was also Willie Mays' the second time he won the MVP that year. So, did you really notice a different Giants team from earlier in that season in 65? And what was your strategy and how did you prepare by facing them that season?
Well, they were always known as an offensive team. They used to make jokes about what they did in spring training, people and fans, and other teams would say that the Giants would go to spring training and they'd roll out all the baseballs and hit for 2 hours, and spring training's day was over. And I'm sure it wasn't like that, but that was the reputation that they had. They had some notorious hitters, and of course, you named off Jim Ray Hart, who was one of the best high ball hitters I've ever seen. And of course, Orlando Cepeda eventually was there, and he probably gave me more trouble than any hitter that I faced. For some reason, either he knew everywhere I was going to throw the pitch and location-wise, and I had trouble getting him out. But you were prepared for that in your mind. We were with the idea that, hey, we've got to pitch these guys the best that we can pitch, and you weren't allowed to make many mistakes, and so we would carry the games into the 7th and 8th inning, where the game would be decided every time on like one run would win the game, and it was power against pitching, and you were prepared for that. We were, as Dodgers.
Now, there's the old motto that good pitching beats good hitting and vice versa, and you're a World Series champion, you're a former pitching coach. What do you make of that motto? What do you think it is?
Well, I think, obviously, if you get to the World Series, you've got good pitching, and if you've got good pitching, and that pitcher pitches the way that he can and knows how, I think good pitching will beat good hitting. I've always thought that.
And I think that really speaks for itself, because you guys won the pennant against the Braves October 2nd that year. You won 3-1, and you guys had really that great stretch down the line. You had that extra inning game. I think that went to the 11th or 12th when Lou Johnson hit a walk-off homer against Joey J of the Reds, and then eventually against the Braves you won the pennant. But how about this for 1965? The Dodgers, they hit .245 as a team. They hit only 78 home runs on that season, but you guys had an ERA as a pitching staff of 2.81. When did you know for sure that you guys could and would win this pennant? When did you know for sure you guys were going to be able to do it?
Well, it's like I said earlier, we accepted the fact that we had the kind of team that to win, we had to execute, we had to steal bases, we had to play defense, and we were not going to beat anybody with home runs. And it was just a matter of fact, and so you took that into the game that you were going to pitch, and you expected to be 0-0 in the 5th inning. Every night, it was a regular occurrence. If we got one, it would be 1. It wouldn't be 5. It would be 1, 1-0, 1-0, 2-1. It was that way every single night, and we come to, especially at Dodger Stadium, we come to kind of an automatic assumption that, hey, if we can get them to the 9th in a 1-1 tie, we'll win it every time. We actually felt that way, and we did most of the time.
What do you consider to be your best pitching performance of that season, the regular season, I mean? Was it that shutout against the Giants when you had 5 strikeouts and only 1 hit, or was it something else during your first year with the Dodgers? What do you think was your best pitching performance, individually speaking?
Oh, gosh, I couldn't answer that. There are many games that, in my mind, a good game would be going 9 innings. That was always one of my accomplishments that I tried to get, is I wanted to go all the way, and I wanted to be under 100 pitches. And if I could do that, it meant that I was ahead of most hitters, didn't walk anyone. That was another thing. That was one of my goals. goals is to not walk anybody. And I kind of always took the assumption that, hey, if the team gets me one run, then they have to score two off of me, and I don't think they can do it. And you kind of kept that thinking as the game went along, and it's kind of a method of pitching. If you can play that game in your mind, and it doesn't matter if you've got if you've got 3 runs, then you change your thinking. Hey, they've got to get 4 to beat me, and I don't think they can do it. And so as the situation changes, and that's one of the things that I don't see in pitching today is where am I right now? What is the score? What is the inning? Because it dictates what you throw, what you do, who you walk, and everything else. And I don't see that in today's pitching. I'm not here to say that today's pitching is not good. Obviously it is, because these guys throwing 98 miles an hour, that's a hard fastball to hit. But the thinking part of the game, I don't think is extended to this era.
That's an interesting observation, and perhaps the defining moment, at least for the regular season of the 1965 Dodgers, there has to be one game that stands above the rest, and if you are thinking what I'm thinking, it has to be that perfect game that Koufax threw against the Cubs September 9th. What do you remember about that perfect game when you were watching Sandy pitch? I think he had 14 strikeouts, 13 strikeouts, 14 strikeouts against the Cubs, just a dominating performance, including striking the side to end it. So what do you remember when you were watching? What were the thoughts going through your head as you were watching Koufax pitch that perfect game?
Well, I can answer this one easily because at that time we had 2 athletic trainers. We had one trainer was Bill Bueller, and we had another trainer was Wayne Anderson. And Wayne Anderson was assigned to basically our pitching staff, and he worked on us, regularly from time to time. I would be on the training table, and we would maybe, if it was your day to get worked on, you'd be laying on the training table listening to Vince Scully, and the game is piped into the clubhouse. And I remember on this particular day that you're talking about, Drysdale and I were in the clubhouse on the training table and getting work done, and it reached the 5th or 6th inning, and Sandy had the no-hitter. And of course, I was new then. I hadn't been there. That was the first year I was there, so I wasn't familiar with what to expect from Koufax except a great game. But Drysdale knew more about it, and he could sense that there's going to be something special happening. And about the 5th or 6th inning, he turned around to me and he said, "Hey, Sandy's got a no-hitter." He said, "We got to go out and watch this." And we put our uniforms on real quickly and went out and sat on the bench and watched the last 3 innings. And it was one of the most amazing things I think I've ever seen, as far as a guy who went to the whip, and the next one was harder than the previous one. And that included all of his pitches, curveballs, fastballs, and so forth. And his hat, he was throwing so hard, his hat was flying off on every pitch as he followed through. And the unfortunate thing for the opposition is, I believe, if I'm correct, I believe, didn't Dick Ellsworth only give up 1 hit, or was it Bob Henley?
Bob Henley was the star of that game. I think Lou Johnson was the only one who got the hit for you guys.
Right, yeah. So, wow, what a game. But you're talking about memorable games previously. You asked me the question. I pitched a one-hitter one day against the Giants in Dodger Stadium, and it was a game where they probably hit the ball as hard as they've ever hit it off of me. And so I always thought that unless you're a guy that just strikes everybody out, no-hitters are kind of freakish things. They're either going to happen or they're not going to happen. It seems to be in the cards, but that one-hitter is probably one of the hardest games that I've ever been hit, except that my defense was stationed perfectly, and every time they hit one hard, somebody caught it. So it's kind of a freakish thing. I wouldn't consider that a good game, and yet it was a one-hitter.
And it's funny you bring that up because things come in all different shapes and sizes in this game. And in the World Series, Drysdale and Koufax, they lost the first two games to the Twins, who had the best record in baseball that year. And many of the runs that they scored were unearned, and so the series shifts to Dodger Stadium in L.A., and you get the start in Game 3, but hey, you get the complete game shutouts, and the Dodgers won 4-0, and the defense, they really tidied up. So what do you think it was that they were able to adjust defensively and to make sure that you didn't have the same trouble that Koufax and Drysdale did out in Minnesota, that they didn't have all those unearned runs and so many errors behind them?
Well, I think one of the things is that they knew they were prepared for my type of pitching. Every time I went out, if I was on my game, I threw a lot of ground balls. And Olson used to prod me on about that. How many ground balls are you going to throw today? And so forth and so on. And, of course, the team was prepared for that. They knew they were going to get some activity, and I think half of catching a ball is being prepared to catch it. Errors are going to be made, and teams are going to get in funks, but fortunately for me, they caught most everything that went on the ground, and I had a lot of confidence coming into that game because I was undefeated against Minnesota lifetime in the other league, in the American League, when I pitched for Washington. I think I was 6-0 coming into that game.
Yes, but this is the world. Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and I mean, that's just a confidence factor for me. And, of course, I knew every one of those hitters. I think that's even more important because I had faced them many, many times in the American League.
As I was going to say, I do apologize for cutting you off. I did not mean to do that. This is the World Series, though, Claude, and it's a completely different animal for the regular season. And you're on the Dodgers now, whereas the Senators didn't really go anywhere. And even though these were the same guys that you had faced when you were in the American League, now this is the World Series. They're up 2-0, and if they win Game 3, they're up 3-0. And still to this day, only once has a team overcome a 3-0 deficit in the playoffs and never once in the World Series. So, really, isn't it different, though, if you really think about it, because the stakes are much higher?
Well, there was tremendous pressure, obviously, on me, and I can remember when we flew back to Los Angeles, I had an aisle seat with my wife sitting in the window seat, and obviously I had that game on my mind the entire trip, and as each person would go up and down the aisle, they would kind of pat me on the shoulder as they passed by, and most of the time they would say, "You're going to get them, you're going to get them." And, of course, they knew what I was thinking. I was thinking about this series, and you have to remember, I think it kind of relates to your makeup, what you are or aren't. I always, I can't say that I don't get nervous or apprehensive or what, but anytime there's a big game and everything, I always felt like that I could get the best out of myself. And by the time we landed on that flight in Los Angeles, well, I was a nervous wreck with apprehension getting off the plane and everything. And now I've got to go home and spend the night and think about it. And I remember getting up the next morning and everything. I ate my usual meal and everything, but I don't think I tasted anything because I don't think I needed anything to give me any more adrenaline than I had. I felt it, and what I needed was just to throw one single pitch. I warmed up, and I felt great, and I remember making the first pitch of the game, and Zoilo Versalles hit it in the left field seats for a double. And then I would say, oh, here we go again. Well, I didn't say that. I needed to get that energy out by way of making a pitch, and I did. It's over with. Now go to work. This is just another game. And I was able to settle down and get out of that inning without them scoring. They messed up a hit-and-run play, a double steal, and I got out of the inning and went on to, well, you know the rest of the story.
Yeah, Versalles, he won the MVP that year over his teammate Tony Oliva, who won the batting title for a second straight year. Versalles, he reached third twice against you in that game. He tried to steal home in the top of the first, but he was caught stealing home. And then Oliva, he grounded into a double play in the sixth to strand Versalles again. So how big would you say it was that Versalles being caught stealing home and being out right there? How big would you say that was for you and helped set the tone for the rest of the game after being caught stealing home in the first?
Now I can settle down and do my thing, and it becomes just another game that you're pitch where you're executing and doing the things that you're trained to do. Had they scored that run,
Claude, you're kind of breaking up for me here. Sorry, go ahead. You're kind of breaking up with the phone right here. Can you try explaining again, sir?
Well, I was saying that it was to the game, and it was, it erased all the apprehension that I had about pitching in my first World Series and what's in store for you, and all of those things were erased immediately, and I could concentrate on a normal game. But the first inning, and you give up a run in the first inning, obviously it's a big negative, because now you're worried about, well, you not behind better, and because you know you can't give up any more, and so forth. So it's a different type of thinking.
I really want to apologize to our listeners who are having technical difficulties. Claude, can you hear me right now? Can you hear me, Claude?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It seems like within the microphone right now, it's kind of cutting off, and so I'm not able to get your full answer. I'm getting kind of the gist of what you're saying, that really set the tone, and that you're able to pitch very well, and that it wouldn't have been good if you stole home successfully.
Well, if I leave that inning down 1-0, it's a totally different ball game, because you have to remember the offense that we had. We weren't going to score many, and so that gave me the confidence to go on and really be aggressive and everything else, rather than if you're behind 1-0, now you go out there and you got to pitch a little bit defensive in a sense that you can't make mistakes. It's true that you can't make mistakes anytime, but your approach to the hitters is totally different when you're behind. You feel like you have to make better pitches.
And then what's your approach when there's no score, if it's tied or if it's ahead? What's your approach then?
Well, I always played the game once again, what inning am I in? Where am I right now? It's 0-0. Okay. I am going to throw zeros up there before and give my team a chance to score first. That was always my objective, is to shut out the team before, so that your team can score first. And that may be 6 innings of shutouts. It may be 7 innings of shutouts. And like I said previously, once my team gets one for me, I change my thinking. Now, they've got to get 2, and I don't think they can get 2 off of me.
And they sure didn't on that Game 3, and Camilo Pascual was the opposing pitcher, and you guys won 4-0. You were back in the series. And so you would start one more time, and that would be in Game 6, as you guys had the chance to clinch it right there in Minnesota. And you took the Game 6 loss, but Howie Reed got more runs than you did. And Mike Cat Grant, he just pitched a great game for the Twins against the Dodgers. He had a complete game, and he hit a 3-run homer also. And so, how did you prepare, knowing you guys could have clinched, and what were your observations of Jim Grant that day in Game 6?
Well, he had a great year that year, and of course, he was a disciple of Johnny Sain as a pitching coach, and I ended up pitching my last active year with Johnny Sain, and I too was very high on him as a pitching coach. I really respected him, but probably one of the disappointments of that game was that I had given up a home run to Bob Allison, and I was down 1-0, and I believe I'm correct on this. We had a man on first base, and Walter Alston pinch hit for me in the 5th inning. And not once at any time during the regular season did he ever do that, because I was a good hitting pitcher. And I'm not here saying that it was a wrong decision, but I would like to have stayed in that game at that point, only being down 1-0, and see how I might have made out.
Well, the Dodgers didn't really do that much in that game, and so Grant had that complete game, and on to Game 7 we go. And I know this is Sandy Koufax on the mound. He has 282 strikeouts that year. It's a single-season record, and Nolan Ryan later breaks that in 73 with 283. And even though this is Koufax on the mound, it's Game 7. He's been there before. How worried were you about that Game 7, even though it was out of your hands? Because at the time, the Twins had home field. You guys didn't. The home team won each of the first 6 games of the series. What was going through your mind heading into that Game 7 in 65?
Well, of course, we all knew what Koufax could do, and everything that he did all year was positive. But, in a final game and with so few runs deciding the game and everything, you expect it to be a close game. It can go either way. I mean, it only takes one pitch, but we had the confidence that Sandy, all year long, he had done whatever was required to win the game. If it meant going 10 innings, 11 innings, whatever. He was determined to pitch in that way that I previously described, is I'm not going to give up any until my team scores. That alone makes you a better pitcher if you're thinking that way. But there was no doubt as to the decision of who was going to pitch that game. And I remember the entire pitching staff was in the bullpen because it's the last day of the year. It's the final game of the World Series, and the season's over afterwards. So I remember Sandy warming up down in the bullpen, and he asked me to stand up there as a left-handed hitter because he wanted to work on his curveball a little bit. And that alone was an experience for me because I had never seen it except from the bench. And when I saw what he could do with the curveball firsthand, where I'm the hitter, there was no doubt in my mind as far as the confidence factor. I knew he would give him trouble, and he did. And of course, Jim Gilliam made the great play at third base that probably was the turning point of the series.
And you guys won 2-0 in Game 7 and the World Series as a result. Koufax in a complete game, 3-hit shutout, 10 strikeouts, 3 walks, including he struck out Bob Allison to win the World Series. And what do you remember about the celebration, the postgame in that Dodger clubhouse, and how long did it take you to sink in that you guys were the world champs?
Oh my gosh, that probably, I get fan letters. Even today, at my age, I still get fan letters from fans for autographs and so forth, and I'm always getting a question like that. What is your greatest thrill in baseball? I think that would have to be it, in being a world champion for the first time in your first World Series. And, of course, I had no idea what was to happen afterward. And obviously it was just fantastic bedlam. I remember specifically getting back to Los Angeles where there were autograph signings, requests, and we went to this one car dealer where he had 4 or 5 of us appearing there for a couple of hours and so forth, and I think we had an agreement where we were supposed to get X number of dollars. I don't even remember how many it was, but this owner of the dealership was so happy when we finished signing after things had kind of quieted down and the fans had left his place of business. He called us back in his office, and my gosh, he had a wad of bills that he just started passing around to the 4 or 5 of us, and it was just total happiness on everyone's part.
If I were to ask you in one word to sum up the 1965 Dodgers as a team, what would your response be?
I think it was pride in wearing the Dodger uniform and representing the Dodgers.
Well, 1966 was different because for much of 1965 you guys were in first place, but except briefly in June in 66 you guys didn't really hold the pennant lead until September 11th. And so what do you think was maybe the low point of that season in 66, and what was the turning point? Because at one point in May you guys were 7 games back, but what do you think was able to turn around your 66 season for you guys to go back to the World Series for the second year in a row?
Well, I tell you, I kind of thought we stole the pennant in 66 from the Giants. I believe it was the Giants.
Yes.
And I didn't think we had quite as good a chemistry on the team in 66. I don't know why. Maybe it was because there were situations where we didn't know who was going to play third. We had so many people in and out and so forth, and sometimes you lose some chemistry because of that. But the Giants had played better than us, and they had won games that they had to win, and we kind of managed to put together enough to steal it away from them. It was an interesting race. Came right down to the last wire, I think. And I'm not sure I'm correct on this, but I'm thinking that we had a doubleheader in Philadelphia. Do you have any record of that?
I can definitely check. I can look it up. All I know is that in '66, things were a lot different. I can look at you guys on Baseball Reference right now. But I know you guys...
Here's the thing that I remember. I thought we had a doubleheader like the last day of the season in Philadelphia. And Bob Miller, who had been a reliever and a spot starter for us, was chosen to pitch. He and I believe Drysdale. No, he and Koufax were to pitch the game. And we lost the first game of that doubleheader, and we had to win the second game. And if we don't win, there's a situation where two other clubs, I think Cincinnati was one of them, and whoever they were going to play had to play a makeup game. And if one won the game, then we had a playoff on our hands with them. And, I mean, you can check all this out, but I remember in the seventh inning, we were down in the game, and we were starting to rally, and had we scored some runs, we could have taken the lead. We didn't do that eventually, but anyway, in anticipation of us taking the lead, Austin sent Koufax down to the bullpen in left field in Connie Mack Stadium to warm up. And he's going to come in the game and possibly save the game that we've got to win. We only need one win. And I remember once again being the last day of the season, all the pitching staff was in the bullpen. And we saw Sandy Koufax coming down there, and he gets up to warm up, and he threw 8 or 10 pitches and was in the process of warming up. And everyone is looking at each other and saying to themselves, hey, he's got to pitch the second game if we lose this game. And we were all wondering what it's going to take out of him, the fact that he's had warmed up, even though it was not very long in that first game. Well, we ended up losing that first game. We did not score the runs, and of course, Koufax pitched the next game, and well, you know the rest of the story. He wins. I think he struck out Richie Allen as the last hitter, and the rest is history. We win the pennant.
Now, what about you in '66? Because here are some numbers. You had 9 complete games in '65, 8 in '66, but also you had 3 shutouts in 1966 compared to just 1 in 1965. What was behind the evolution of Claude Osteen as a pitcher from '65 to '66?
Well, I don't think there was very much difference. I don't know. What was my record in '66?
I could check. My computer isn't really pulling up for me. I think that you did have a better record.
Well, anyway, I don't think there was much difference. If I was pitching so consistently then, and turning in ERAs of 2.64, 2.79, and so on every year, and I was averaging 7 innings plus per start in the whole season, and so there wasn't much change in my pitching. It was, as far as the records were concerned, it depended entirely on how much offense you get, how much defense you get, and so on. Those were the things that would decide the game. I had the consistency going, so in my mind, I don't think there was very much difference.
Okay, it says your record in 1966 was 17-14.
Yeah. One of the things in my entire career that bothered me, and of course I can't give an answer for it. I have to take it on my own shoulders because it was I who lost the 14 games. But one of the things that probably had a little something to do with making me a better pitcher than I possibly might not have been is I was frustrated over the games that I was losing. I in my mind, I was turning in performances that I knew I should be winning more games. My record should be more of a winning percentage than it was. Instead of 17-14, I, in my mind, should have been something like maybe 17-8 or 9 or something like that. I just thought that I was pitching better than my record ended up showing. And that was a frustrating thing for me. And the way that I had to handle it is every night when I would pitch and I would go home, I had 4 boys and a girl, and they always came to the games, and they would go to bed, and my system couldn't run down for a couple hours after I got home. I'm replaying the game, so I'd be there and listening to music and replaying the game myself, and I worried about all these things that I just mentioned to you about winning percentage, and man, I'm pitching better than this. 2.64 ERA. I'm giving up like 1 run, no runs, and losing. And I made a pact with myself that, hey, I am worrying about too many things that I have no control over. And I made a pact with myself that from this day on, I'm going to turn everything, every negative that can possibly come into my mind when I'm out on the mound or off the mound, I'm going to turn it into a positive. And so when a guy would make an error behind me, I would call timeout and call him up to the mound and say, hey, don't worry about it, I'm going to pick you up. And it might be that I wasn't able to do that. Sometimes I didn't, but most times I did. And what it did, I put it all on my own shoulders. And when I started doing that, I don't know what caused it to happen, but I seemed to find myself pitching with more early leads than I ever had, and all of a sudden pitching started being a lot more fun because you're pitching with leads early in the game, and the way that we pitched, we knew we weren't going to give up many. So it has a direct relation to your pitching in your career, and I can't hide the fact that I was 17-14 because that's what it was, and I had something to do with it. So in my mind, it was the best I could do.
Well, I think if you're pitching in this decade, if you're pitching in this era instead of 50 years ago, you probably get some Cy Young votes because the rest of the numbers were good, and wins and losses, while still important, they aren't the be-all, end-all like they once were, and I think that they were judged a lot more back then than they are now. It's a different era.
Yeah.
So, in that 66 World Series, the Orioles swept you guys through no fault of your own, though, because you guys did pretty well. I mean, you individually, Claude, you did very well. Like I said, a .86 ERA in the World Series, that's fifth of all time, the fifth lowest of all time, despite the 1-2 record. But they took a 2-0 lead in that series. They would go on to win 4-0. So here we are again 1 year later, and you find you and your teammates, you're down 0-2 in the series. What are you thinking? Are you treating it any differently as you are from 65? Because in Game 3 and 65, you guys went to Dodger Stadium after losing the first two in Minnesota, but in 66, you lose the first two in LA, and you go to Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. So what is the difference there, if anything? Are you thinking anything different? Are you thinking the same thing you were in 65? What's going through your mind at that point just before Game 3?
Well, obviously we had the confidence coming from 65, but you never like to get in that situation, that environment, especially being in Baltimore. But it had nothing to do with our pitching. We took everything in stride and just assumed that we were going to do our job from a pitching standpoint. I felt like I could throw a shutout, almost did, and Drysdale did the same thing. Unfortunately, we lost back-to-back, 1-0, 1-0. And Frank Robinson, I mean, we're losing to a great team. They had a great season, and everyone knows what a great ball player Frank Robinson was. Not only he, but Brooks Robinson and all those guys. They had a fantastic season. Paul Blair hit a home run off of me and beat me, and Robinson hit a home run off of Drysdale and beat him. And it was about as good as we can pitch. And that's why in that era where every night it's going to be 0-0, 1-1, 2-1, no more than that. Not very many times. You were prepared for that kind of action, and this was no different. I'll give you a quick story. It's kind of funny. I have 4 sons, and 2 of them played professionally. And my youngest son called me a couple weeks ago, and he wanted to know if I had Mike Scioscia's telephone number, because he played for Scioscia when Scioscia was managing at Albuquerque. And of course I coached with Mike, and I have them in here. We go out to lunch every time the Angels come in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I get together with them and celebrate old times and so forth. So I gave him Mike's number, and I told him, I said, you should call him because he'd like to hear from you. And so he did, and Gavin arranged, Mike left him tickets when the Angels came into Baltimore to play a week or so ago. And so as Gavin was sitting down in his seat with his family, on the billboard out there, the big screen, they were playing the 1966 World Series. And it just so happened that weekend they had brought members of that team, the 66 World Champions, and they were introducing them out on the field. And as Gavin and his family sat down, they were playing the 66 World Series on the screen, and I happened to be pitching. So they got all excited, and they took a picture of all that stuff and sent it to me by way of a text, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it was. And you mentioned Frank Robinson. He won the Triple Crown that year and also the World Series MVP and the American League MVP as well. So a big year for him, probably his signature season. But like you mentioned, Paul Blair hit that home run deep to left in the bottom of the fifth. You pitched very well, 7 innings, 3 hits, but that one run was the killer right there. And I think the Orioles, they posted 3 straight shutouts in that World Series from games 2 to 4. If you reflect on that at-bat against Paul Blair, what did you throw him in that at-bat when you were facing him, when you faced Paul Blair in that Game 3? What did you throw him?
It was a bad pitch location-wise. It was a fastball that I tried to get in and didn't get it in far enough. And it was a situation that it was not uncommon for me to experience. I mean, it was a situation where in almost every game that we pitched, one mistake would cost you a ball game, and I made it, and it cost me the game. It was a pitch up, middle in, and he hit it, which is what he's supposed to do. I'm not supposed to throw it there, and I mean, 9 out of 10 times, maybe you would be allowed to get away with one mistake that wouldn't cost you the game, but not in those situations. The thing that surprised most of us is that the 2 guys who shut us out threw a lot of fastballs, and we were a pretty good. We didn't have a lot of hitting, but we could hit the fastball. And we did not hit the fastball in that series. And that kind of surprised us a little bit. We didn't expect that. We expected more offense from the fastball pitchers.
Yeah, in Game 3, you were in that pitching duel with Wally Bunker.
And he had a good year that year. He had pitched well. And you got to hand it to him. You know, we lost to a better team.
What kind of impact did Koufax's retirement have on you, since he called it quits after the 66th season because of his arm troubles? How did Koufax's retirement impact you?
Well, it impacted me quite a lot. It took me by total surprise. I was in Japan on a goodwill tour with the Dodgers after the 66 series, and, you know, after losing 4 straight in the World Series and having to go on a goodwill tour to Japan is not the most ideal travel that you would expect. The attitudes going over there, obviously I was excited about getting to go to Japan for the first time, but the memories of the series and the results of it, we hadn't gotten over that yet. And it was hard to show, even though we did, it was hard to show very much goodwill. And we were staying in a hotel called New Otani, and we got a knock on the door one night. What they did is they had a reporter who had asked us, myself and Jim Brewer, my roommate, if he could come to our room after we played each game over there and kind of go over the game with him in a relaxed atmosphere. And so he knocked on our door one night, and we answered the door, and he wanted to know if we were aware that Mr. Sandy Koufax had announced his retirement. And neither of us expected it. It took us by total surprise.
And that was the last year for Koufax, but also the first year for another future Hall of Famer, and Don Sutton, whom you mentioned earlier. He debuted in April of that year. What were your initial impressions of Don Sutton during his rookie year?
Well, they were good impressions. He was a good individual. He was cocky. He had a great great curveball, and unlike a lot of rookies, he had problems with left-handed hitters because he didn't have anything that basically went away from the hitter. And shortly after he started finding out that he's going to have something else in that direction, he started working on a kind of an off-speed changeup, fadeaway sinker as a changeup, and that seemed to help him quite a bit. And of course, having the confidence that he had and the curveball that he had, and adding that pitch made him a good pitcher, and he went on to, of course, Hall of Fame stature, and became a great pitcher. But as far as our club not having Koufax was a totally different story. It was a lot more that was expected from each one of us. And, well, I think, didn't Drysdale retire the next year?
Something like that. Yeah, I think he did retire around there. Yes, I think in 68 or 69. You are correct about that. Yes, Drysdale retired not too long after that.
So it was like a changing of the guard, and those guys were sorely missed. We loved both of them.
And even though 1967 wasn't a good year for the team, you yourself, you did very well. Yes, Drysdale's last appearance was in 69, by the way. His last appearance was in 69. In 67, you had 14 complete games, 5 shutouts. The team won 73 and 89, but you had a 3.22 ERA. And how did it feel to make your first All-Star team in 1967? What kind of an honor was that to you?
Well, it was a big thrill. Anytime you make an all-star team with a competition that we had, you feel honored, and you're obviously impressed by all of the players that you're in the clubhouse with, because they're the guys that you read about and tried to get out all season, and some of them are, classic players like Mays, Mantle, and all those guys that make them every year. And I think probably the most memorable one was the 70 series. I don't know if you are getting to that.
Oh, yeah, I will be. You were the winning pitcher in that game. That was when Pete Rose bowled over Ray Fosse, and when Jim Hickman, who just passed away, got the winning hit off of Clyde Wright. That was when Pete Rose, he had that collision with Ray Fosse, and you were the winning pitcher in that game.
Yeah, and I guess a bit of trivia here. I don't hear it very much, but it is trivia. I actually got in that game as a pinch runner before I pitched. Gil Hodges had sent me down to the bullpen to warm up, and told the bullpen coach to call him when I got ready. So what it meant was I had to get ready in a hurry, and I didn't know what he was doing. And of course, relieving was something that I wasn't accustomed to anyway, but still, what he did is he pitch hit Willie McCovey, and he wanted the pitcher in his spot, so he sent me in to pinch run at first base for McCovey. And that meant the pitcher would be 9 hitters away because he wanted me to pitch more than 1 inning. And so that's how I pitched the 3 innings. And then, of course, the rest of the story is history. Rose got the hit off of Clyde Wright, and Rose didn't get the hit. Jim Hickman got the hit.
Yes. Off
of Clyde Wright, and scored the run. there were 3 Tennesseans involved in that decision. Clyde Wright was from Tennessee. I was a winning pitcher from Tennessee, and Jim Hickman was from Tennessee. So we had a little bit of attention for the state of Tennessee. And of course, no one remembers that because everyone remembers Pete Rose crashing into Ray Fosse, which was the winning run. And the thing I remember mostly about All-Star games that kind of is in direct disagreement with the attitude that fans have today is that they think that the players don't care about the All-Star game. I can't speak for the American League, but in the National League, the teams that I was on, you couldn't find a team that wanted to beat the American League, the other league, any more than these guys that I was on the team with. And it was a pride factor, and they loved being there. So those stories that you hear about, well, they don't care, this and that, maybe that's true today, I don't know. But you see guys bowing out of it, but I think it's mostly injury more than anything else.
Well, things have changed in the All-Star Game, and now ever since 2003, the winning team gets home field advantage in the World Series. I can only imagine if you guys had that back then, that would have motivated you guys even more then. You guys would have been even more motivated back then if they would have had the home field advantage in the World Series incentive.
I think about that a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure you do, because around that time, the late 60s and early 70s, you go from a number 3 and eventually you take over as the number 1. So what was it like being the guy now for the Dodgers after a few years of being a number 3 or number 2? What was it like to finally be the number 1, and what kind of feeling and responsibility did you carry around on your shoulders back then?
Well, I think a lot more is expected of you being number 1. And, yeah, it is a little bit more pressure. I don't think, not in a sense to change your pitching, but I think the fact that you're in that position so many times you tie up with the other team's best pitcher. So you're not assured of it being a great game. They publicize it all the time as you can't wait to see a hookup between this guy and that guy. And so many times, I've seen that several times with Koufax, where this is a dream matchup like him and Jim Bunning or somebody like that. And a lot of times it turns out to be nothing. Both guys are gone after 5 innings. Now, that didn't happen very much with Koufax, but you see it happen quite a lot when two aces are paired up.